The war in Ukraine has already lasted longer than World War I. More than 1.3 million Russian soldiers have been taken out. This is more than the total strength of the entire Russian army before the full-scale invasion. Out of those, 500,000 have been killed. This is significantly more than the USSR lost in Afghanistan or the US lost in Vietnam. It is nearly as many as those who died on both sides in the Iran-Iraq War, which dragged on for almost 8 years. How is this even possible in the 21st century? Western analysts say that most of the Russian army's equipment and manpower has been destroyed specifically by Allied weapons. The Kremlin, in response, claims that Russian forces go through Western armor like butter. Therefore, they argue, these weapons do not affect the course of the battle, and their losses are moderate. But what is the reality? What is happening on the front lines right now can be described as a death conveyor. The Russians assault in small groups, while the Ukrainians set up a kill zone right in their path. We are talking about pre-sighted and mined areas of terrain where enemy movement is expected. As soon as a recon drone spots a target, a timer starts ticking. In less than a minute, FPVs carrying explosives launch into the sky. At night, these are thermal-equipped FPVs, which also carry explosives. Who is supplying these little killers? It is not the US, and it is not Europe. While at the start of the war, components came from Asia, today a significant portion of production has been localized right inside Ukraine. This is a network of hundreds of private companies and startups across the country, churning them out on a scale of millions. In 2025, the Ukrainian army received over 3 million FPVs. But in 2026, this number could rise to 8 million, and even, according to Zelensky, up to 10 million, provided there is funding from the Allies. This means there are several FPVs for every single Russian soldier on the front line. Russian propagandists are in absolute shock.
This sounds very unpleasant, but when we send a truckload of soldiers to the front, the Ukrainians receive a truckload of FPVs.
When the destroy in 60 seconds game begins, the outcome is almost always fatal. This exact method is how 60 to 80% of Russian soldiers are being eliminated today. FPVs are the primary weapon. However, most Russian soldiers did not die from drones. They were killed long before the drone era even started. To understand where these 500,000 dead came from, we need to go back in time.
First, we wiped out their most well-trained forces, and then they sent us the losers. Most of them are just cannon fodder.
Prior to the drone era, which kicked off in 2024 with the creation of the world's first independent drone branch, up to 80% of all Russian army losses in this war came from Ukrainian artillery strikes. The first weeks of the war, the aerial blitzkrieg failed, but the Russians still believed in a ground blitzkrieg. In European capitals, pessimism reigned, with many believing Ukraine was doomed. Russian tank columns roll forward as if they are on a parade. Ukrainian artillery is already waiting for them, but there are no M777s, PZH-2000s, or Archers yet. These are mostly Soviet-era guns and MLRSs, yet the accuracy is insane. How is this possible? And this is where things get interesting. Ukrainian artillerymen managed to double their accuracy compared to previous wars, thanks to reconnaissance and speed of deployment. They launched Ukrainian Furia drone systems into the sky, and even ordinary civilian Mavics. Target data was instantly entered into Kropyva, a tablet and smartphone app that even raw recruits could operate. And this completely revolutionized reaction times and fire correction. On screen, Kropyva looks like interactive maps of the tactical situation, displaying enemy positions and friendly forces. It links drones, reconnaissance teams, and artillery into a single network, cutting the time from target detection to fire mission to just seconds. The built-in ballistic calculator instantly computes fire parameters for any gun and any shell type. The result? The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed 1,351 of their soldiers were killed in the first month of fighting. OSINT researchers estimated 16,000. What was the actual reality? The Russian 1st Tank Army suffers a total rout in February to March 2022 and rolls back to replenish its personnel. The Russian 35th Combined Arms Army is bled white. In some of the Army's motor rifle brigades, fewer than 100 combat-ready soldiers remain, and that is just the first month of the war. The Russian 200th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade loses most of its combat-ready strength and urgently receives several hundred civilian reservists. The 22nd and 3rd Special Forces Brigades lose up to half of their personnel due to orders to act as ordinary infantry. This is far from a complete list. But one thing is clear: the Russian tactics completely failed. There is even a casualty champion among the Russian brigades and armies. Who exactly? A little patience, my friends. For now, we are interested in whether Western weapons took part in the massacre of those first few weeks.
You know what I gave them? I gave them Javelins. And the Javelins were very effective, as you know. I gave them nothing.
Not only Javelins, but also the British-Swedish NLAWs, which scorched Russian columns, became the primary Western weapons at the start of the war. Small Ukrainian mobile groups destroyed tanks and BMPs in cities and heavily forested areas. At the same time, the Turkish Bayraktar TB2 UAVs became the symbol of Ukrainian resistance, taking out air defense systems, fuel columns, and armor from the air. But their contribution to total Russian losses was only a few percent. The bulk of the work was done by old Soviet artillery, but that was only the beginning of the war. Once the Russian plans for a quick land grab were shattered, the second phase of the war began, where Western weapons started playing a much more prominent role. Summer 2022. Ukraine receives long-range Caesars, German PZH-2000s, and American M777s. The results come just 2 months later, during the Kharkiv counteroffensive in September 2022. First, the M777s systematically pound Russian bunkers and firing points. Thanks to Western radar systems, they also detect and destroy Russian artillery before it can even reach Ukrainian positions. The Russian guns simply lack the range. This Ukrainian advantage secures a breakthrough in the Russian defense. Once the line ruptured, mobile SPGs entered the game. They moved alongside the advancing troops, providing continuous fire support. The Western SPGs also hammered the retreating Russian columns. It was a cascading collapse of the front. The Russians abandoned over 300 pieces of equipment. Personnel losses in just a few days were at least 2,000 killed alone. But that was just a warm-up. No less iconic was the southern counteroffensive and the liberation of Kherson. This was not a breakthrough, but a war of attrition. What was the role of Western weapons here? Unlike in the Kharkiv region, the Russians here had prepared a deep, multi-layered defense consisting of airborne units, so the fighting dragged on for several months. Then, the Russian General Staff announced a so-called difficult decision.
Маневр будет осуществлен в ближайшие сроки.
And withdrew their forces. What happened? The primary role was played by the HIMARS systems, but they did not target manpower. Instead, they struck bridges across the Dnipro River and ammo depots deep in the rear. In doing so, HIMARS cut off the Russian grouping from ammunition and fuel supplies. Facing the threat of total destruction, the Russians retreated, avoiding massive casualties. However, this marked the beginning of the meat assault era, as the Russian army received massive reinforcements from mobilization and recruitment, including from prisons. It was during this stage of the war that the Russians died on a staggering scale. The role of Western weapons? Massive. Western artillery in Ukrainian hands inflicted heavy losses on the Russian army.
Увага! Стрім розвідроти. Спостерігає рух 8 ББМ в нашому напрямку.
Зарядити, прийом.
And it was all thanks to some very interesting ammunition. Before we dive into the details, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It doesn't just inspire our team, it also helps promote our videos. Thank you. Meat assault or meat wave attack is the unofficial name for the Russian offensive tactic. This is what soldiers call the attempt to breach defenses not through maneuver or artillery attrition, but by throwing sheer numbers of people at the problem. Here is how it looks. Massive assault columns, accompanied by armor, push forward one after another under heavy artillery fire. Often, they assault the exact same positions where the previous column was just wiped out. If they fail, the trick is repeated over and over until they manage to break through. A month, 6 months, a year. Every single time, this endless stream of Russian infantry found themselves under artillery fire. And if American dual-purpose improved conventional munitions fell on the Russians' heads, surviving was incredibly difficult. So, we are talking about 155mm DPICMs, or their European equivalents. Inside each shell, there are between 49 and 88 high-explosive dual-purpose submunitions, depending on the manufacturing country. When detonated in mid-air, a single shell showers an area the size of a football field with pre-formed shrapnel. They are equally effective at piercing 100mm armor on vehicles and mowing down infantry. Everything that moves gets turned into a colander, from armored vehicles and infantry to even the steppe hares. The Russians had never seen anything like this. The Ukrainians had not either, because the 152mm analogs that Ukrainian artillery possessed at the start of the war contain only 8 fragmentation submunitions, meaning significantly less. Ukraine received over 900 units of towed and self-propelled Western-style artillery that can fire these shells. Just imagine the losses the Russian army suffered during their meat attacks. But traditional high-explosive NATO standard shells also inflicted record casualties, thanks to their power and range, and the precision of Western artillery compensated for the ammunition shortage. Over the span of several months, the Russian army lost at least 1,000 soldiers killed every single day in these meat assaults. It was in the Donbass that the Russian army lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The undisputed champion of casualties is considered to be the 155th Separate Marine Brigade, which became a symbol of disaster. In March 2022, this brigade suffered a complete collapse near Kharkiv. After this defeat, Putin awarded the brigade the honorary title of Guards. In November 2022, the brigade was thrown into a meat grinder near Vuhledar. Assaulting across open fields cost them 100 to 150 killed and wounded every single day. January and February 2023, Vuhledar again. The brigade was routed in the largest tank battle of the war, where over 130 pieces of heavy equipment were lost. In 2024, the brigade was bled dry once more during the assault on Vovchansk and the battles in the Kursk region. The brigade was replenished with criminals and sadists, who executed prisoners of war and beheaded them. Almost no one from the original active duty personnel at the start of the war survived. Throughout the course of the war, the brigade had to be reconstituted at least 8 times. But other Russian brigades suffered heavy losses as well. And when the death toll began to outpace the influx of new recruits and vehicle storage depots emptied out, the Russian generals shifted their tactics, practically abandoning vehicle columns and classic meat waves. Now they assault in tiny groups of 2 to 4 people on foot, day and night, with their radios turned off. They infiltrate through weak spots in the defense to gather in tree lines for subsequent strikes. The Ukrainians detect and eliminate them using domestically produced drones. Tanks, artillery, and other heavy equipment are kept far back from the front lines. The concept of the small sky emerged, which is where the primary struggle is taking place. Until there is a winner up there, it makes no sense for tanks and artillery to show up on the battlefield. The drone era in warfare is in full swing. Let us know in the comments, is this a unique feature of this war, or is it a global trend? And if you have thoughts on what the next phase of warfare will look like, and which weapons will take center stage, please write them down, because your opinion is highly valuable to us. In these playlists, you will find other videos about the Western systems fighting in Ukraine. Many of them have shown themselves in very unexpected ways. Stay safe and support Ukraine.